Hi, I'm Frank Solero. I'm here with John Fluharty, and we're here to talk about the various CommVault appliances that we offer. And we're going to start out with this guy right here. Tell us a little bit about this box.
Sure, Frank, thanks. So this is an RO1100. We now have that as a remote office appliance. It's our small device, goes from anywhere from 5 to 15 terabytes usable capacity. That being said, it's the same unit no matter what. There's no upgrade path from a hardware standpoint. What we do is we put 3 8-terabyte drives in the front as a 2+1 RAID 5 with a RAID controller in the back. And then we just license it. So if the customer wants a 5 terabyte, they can purchase that license. If they need the 15 terabyte later, we can simply increase that with a CommVault license. But this unit is a little bit different than what you guys have probably seen in the past, the HS1300. It is the same server, so it's still an RX 2530 from Fujitsu that we're using. But the difference, so obviously I just mentioned the RAID controller. We don't have a RAID controller in the HS1300. That's using erasure coding, which we'll talk about later in another video. It does have the 3 drives across the front, and then on the 4th drive, it's an SSD. So that's where we do our index caching and DDB. We house that there. This is a Windows 2016 server as opposed to Linux. So the HS1300 and the 3300, which we can talk about in a later video, are both Linux with Gluster running on top. So the SSD here, we now have 2 CPUs. So this comes with 2 dual CPUs. I know in the past some of us saw only a single CPU in the HS1300. This has the dual CPU, 128 gig of RAM. Obviously you get all the fans for the CPUs. It still has the SATA DOM, so that's where we do the M2 for the 150 gig OS and CommServe binaries. And then finally, instead of 10 gig, we do just have a standard quad port 1 gig interface on that, which can do bonding if needed. And then there is a SKU if you want to upgrade to 10 gig, but we've found that with the remote appliances, most are just the 1 gig interfaces. So that's really, again, it's dual power supplies, still an enterprise server just like the 1300, but more for remote office from the sizing standpoint.
Okay, so the Windows box. Obviously, the Linux, the Gluster file system is what gives us the erasure code, but this is a standalone box, so no erasure code, and that's why we go with the RAID.
Correct.
And the next video, we'll start getting into the hyperscale, the 1300, and compare and contrast between the 1100 model and the 1300 model.
Right.
All right, so this is an 1100.
Correct.
But as you mentioned, it's the same chassis as a 1300.
Right.
So let's compare and contrast the 1100 to the 1300.
Sure, sure. So as Frank said, yeah, we're using the same prop because it literally is the same server on the 1100 and the 1300. The difference is that we've done, number one, the big difference is the OS, right? So the 1100 is Windows, 2016 Windows, all licensed by CommVault, so that's nothing that the customer has to worry about. By the way, I should mention that these SKUs are completely licensed by CommVault. So there's no extra, if you're a 1300, there's no Red Hat licensing, there's no Windows licensing on the 1100. But the difference is, if we talk about the 1300, we mentioned that there's 3 drives across the front with a RAID controller on the 1100. With the 1300, we use all 4 slots for the data drives for our storage pool. Times 3 for 3 servers, which gives you 12 drives, and that's where you get your minimum 29 terabytes usable or up to 87 terabytes usable if you use the new 12 terabyte drives that we're using now. So we still have 4 terabyte, 6 terabyte, 8 terabyte, and now 12 terabyte drives for the 1300. So we do have all 4, and then inside on the 1300, the difference is we put a NVMe 2 terabyte SSD in the back, and that's where our DDB and index cache goes. And we still do have the M2 SATA DOM 150 gig for the CommVault binaries and the OS binaries. Some of the differences now with the 1300, we have before, we've got many of the 1300s in production out there now. One of the differences in the new ones, as coming up with SP13 is we now have dual CPUs. So we've added the second CPU, and the reason why we've done that is because we now have bonding available on the 1300, which means we needed a second dual port 10 gig card. So we've put that in the PCI slot, which used to be disabled, is now enabled with the second CPU, and that gives us the ability to have the 10 gig up top and still the OCP dual port 10 gig available. And if we want to do bonding across those two cards, we can. And then that still gives us the availability to add the extra SKU for the fiber channel port, the SAS port if you're doing tape out, which these do tape out by default. That all comes with the SKU. And then we've added some memory as well to beef up the CPU and the memory on the CommServe if you are running the CommServe on the HS1300, which is an option. You can either do it media agent or media agent / CommServe.
So you talked about the new 1300 shipping with the two CPUs. What happens for all those customers that purchase the 1300 with just a single CPU?
Good question. So what we do is we do have a SKU that they can we can send out, and that will add the SKU comes with a second CPU, the extra 32 gig of RAM. We had 96 gig of RAM. We've added 32 to make it 128. And it also comes with the dual port 10 gig card. So we can send that out. We can have that installed for the customer, and then we do have a process to go ahead and add those resources to the CommServe on the HS1300 if they're running the CommServe on the 1300. If they need updated to SP13, we would do that as well. That's one thing that's required for the extra hardware. So that's all available to the existing customers.
Sounds great.
So one of the things we wanted to talk about in some of the previous videos, we talked about the networking and some of the changes that we've done to the 1300 and as well as the 1100. We don't need to talk probably too much about the 1100. It's a Windows 2016 server with a quad 1 gig interface on the back. It gives you the availability during the setup to do trunking, bonding, what you need to do there, and that's pretty much it. It's one server. But for the 1300, some of the things that we've done different, this is basically a single connection as you've seen in the past, what we had here for the last year or so, and we've just now upgraded to LACP and some bonding capabilities. But let's go through kind of what the 1300 looked like in the past and what it can still do as well. Notice we have the 3 servers. And as you know, you have the storage network and the data protection network, the blue and the red. Notice how they all go to the same switch. We could also have a separate switch. But that being said, since they're not bonded together, if you lost one of those switches, you're going to lose. In this case, you would lose all 3 nodes. If you had a second switch, 2 of those nodes would have to be on that one switch. So if you lost that switch, you will lose the appliance. So one of the things we've done is, and this is the same what I just mentioned. Notice you have now going 2 to one switch, 1 to the other switch. So we're fine if we lose this switch. We would still be up and running with 2 nodes. If we lose this switch, we're gone, right? So, and then we have the IRMC ports to the 1 gig. I should mention that. That's always required for the IRMC, the lights out card, you could call it that. We do fencing with that if you do have the CommServe running on the appliance, so that is needed. One of the things I should mention as well, this subnet can be the same as the data network, or it can be different, but one thing it does need is a route to the data network, and that's for the fencing that we do for the CommServe failover. So that's the single connection. Now if we talk about bonding a little bit, this now uses more 10 gig ports. We now need 12 for the HS1300, 4 per node, and there's 3 nodes, so 12 ports, and we still need the IRMC ports, so 3 there. This does allow for bonding, and then we can, if one of the things that this obviously saves us from, and a lot of the customers ask for this, is if a switch goes down, if they have 2 top-of-rack switches, if one goes down, we're still up and running. So let's take a look at that. This is basically what we've got now. So we now have 4 ports on each HS1300 node. Notice these are 2 10 gig ports here, 2 10 gig ports here. Some coming out of the factory, you may see that card here or here. It's still the same thing. It depends on how they've ordered it with the SKUs, whether you get the fiber channel card, the SAS card. So you may see it in a different, kind of a different orientation, but it's still the same setup. So you've got your bonded network for your storage port, for your storage network, and your bonded layer 2 bonding for the data network. And now we have the ability to take each node to both switches. So if we lose a switch, all 3 nodes are still up and running on both networks. And then notice we still have the IRMC going across there for each individual node for our lights out and for our fencing. So one of the, single 10 gig, scenarios, we have single 10 gig port, which we just talked about, plus the 1 gig IRMC. That uses 6 10 gig ports, 3 1 gig ports. No network redundancy on the nodes in that case. And then we talked about the bonding, which you have 2 10 gig ports for the storage network and 2 for the data network, which is a total of 4 per node. And then you still need the 1 gig ports for the IRMC. And then finally, there's another one that we haven't talked about, which is we can actually use one of those 1 gig ports, and let me just show you here. So we do have the 2 1 gig Ethernet ports on each one of these nodes. So that can actually be used for a network management port. And what that is, we've found that some customers have their 10 gig data network on a layer 2 network, which means there's no gateway, no DNS, things like that. Well, if you have the CommServe running on the HS1300, we need those things to communicate with the CommServe. So we allow you to plug in one of those 1 gig ports on each node, and that can give you the network management capability that you would need for the layer 3 going to the CommServe. So that is an option now with SP13 and on. It's actually been through since SP12. It is in the setup, so during the setup you can literally say, click on from management network, have the customer run those cables, and we can get on that subnet. Finally, let's just talk real quick about 16 gig versus 10 gig. We do have the capability to put a 16 gig fiber channel card in these appliances. You can do from 1 to 3. Obviously, you put 1 in one node, you're not going to be redundant. So we really, typically we suggest that you put 2 in, and even 3, especially if your customer has LAN-free backups. You want to use that as much as possible. You want all 3 nodes running with these physical media agents. So you can put SAN, fiber channel SAN, or we also have the SAS cards if you need to do tape out on these, which do allow tape out on each individual node. This is a quick little bit of a busy diagram, but I just wanted to throw it out there. This now has the bonding. This is so if you have 1300, this is one of the capabilities. You now have the bonding to each switch, 10 gig switch. You have the IRMC that you need, and what I didn't draw is the possible even network management that you could have coming off of this. And then finally, we have a fiber channel card in here that we have a couple different vSANs. Just as an example, we can have tape out. We can have SAN storage for the LAN-free backups and telesnap, things like that. All the capabilities of the HS1300 right there. Thanks very much.